As Shazna mentioned, this isn't new. And so I just have, since I'm a professor, I like to go back in time a little bit, all right? Very, very quick. You know, you look at, I kind of see this as being what we're looking at right now, this experiential media form. This is potentially a chapter 3. Chapter 1 was basically about broadcast. So everything from the Gutenberg press to the first TV broadcasts, it took hundreds of years for that change to happen. And then you had a few decades, which was interactivity, right? So everything from, you know, the internet to then moving into our pockets. And you're looking at, you know, 88 to 99, and that was kind of the next kind of big phase. Now, I think that we may be entering a new chapter. And I don't say that lightly because some of you may have seen me talk at another ISOJ back in, I think, gosh, 2007 was it? Talking about social media, the last time I was up here. And that was definitely something that was, you know, was and is important, but I kind of see that still being part of this chapter too, because VR is really very, very different. You can jump inside stories. That is like amazing. And for those of you who've tried it, it really is something very fundamentally different to be able to do that, to go inside the story and feel like you were there, to be able to interact with parts of a story. We don't really do that other than you know, maybe with the Russian Mario game as Putin, right? You know, that's some interactivity. But you know, it's possible to set up scenes that are, you know, recreated where you can go through and you can interact with objects and scenes and potentially change what happens, right? That's kind of a new thing for journalism, not new for the gaming industry. And then, you know, transporting people's consciousness. You know, talk about Star Trek. Like, this is really, you know, powerful stuff. So what are the different flavors of VR in our VR ice cream store? There's really 4 of them right now. You've got the BYO phone, or it's sometimes referred to as casual VR, which is sort of a controversial term. We may get into that in the panel a little bit. The terminology, nobody has really settled on, which is fine. We should not be optimizing at this point. And that's really you know, what Google Cardboard has done, and others too. It's really focused on 360 video. New York Times is all about that right now. 2 is kind of like number 1, having a phone with a dedicated headset in it. So up until actually relatively recently, you could get a new Samsung phone and they just give you the VR headset along with it. I think now you pay like $100 for that. But I think we're kind of at an inflection point where we might start seeing phones just, it's like if you don't have a phone with a headset, like what is that, right? It's kind of interesting. And these are, you can do some CGI, so computer generated environment type work in here, but it's still primarily 360. And those 2 are really, it's funny, I was looking for images of what those experiences are like. It's like having a fishbowl around your head. So, and remember Counting Crows, right? So imagine, you know, it's like you can't walk in those experiences, right? So you have this fishbowl and there's a video there and you can look around. Sometimes it's called the swivel chair experience. It's still powerful, but it's limited. Which then gets into flavor number 3, which is sit-down VR with a gamepad. So then you have you know, you're bringing in the ability to move around the scene, but you're not physically moving through it, and that's the Oculus primarily. Then you have number 4, so immersive walk-around VR. So a few of you tried this. Raise your hands if you tried this yesterday, or if you've tried the HTC Vive. I think we'll all agree that's really the most immersive form because you have these positional sensors that can tell exactly where you're in a room. You can see a representation of your hands. You can get down on the floor. This is a lot of the stuff that Nani de la Peña really spearheaded, and now HTC is kind of behind us in a more official way. So there are a lot of, you know, different experiments going on, but I always like to think back to, well, you know, is this still hype? Does anyone remember this when CNN announced, it's like, ooh, now we're going to have a visit from a hologram, you know, and it's going to be like, you know, the Princess Leia news reporter right in front of us, and then quickly afterwards people said, this is not really holograms, and it's kind of hokey, right? You know, is that, you know, we're going to have our Princess Leia hologram moment from CNN, and which gets to hype. So some of you may have seen this, the Gartner's hype cycle. You kind of have this trigger, something is introduced, and you have this peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, and then the plateau of productivity. So this is kind of where I see things are at. I think that trigger was a long time ago in 1838 when the very first stereoscopic image was produced. It's actually up in upstate New York of Niagara Falls, near where I work now. Then you get to 1968. This is one of the most ridiculous-looking steampunk-like VR headsets. It actually hung from the ceiling, and it had a little bit of walk-around motion in it, which is sort of interesting. But you know, like you couldn't really walk down the street with that, and that was at MIT, the Sword of Damocles. Gotta love that. In 1995, then we have the Nintendo Virtual Boy. Did anybody here try that? Okay, did you barf? Raise your hand, keep your hand up if you barfed or almost barfed. Like, it would make you so sick, right? And it would just pour, like you could play Mario Tennis. And so then you ended up in the trough of disillusionment, and there was this shame to even talk about whether you were in VR, unless you were Shazna going to VR conferences, and you're like, we're gonna stick with it. And a lot of stuff just continued in research labs though, right? Just kind of like when we had the .bomb that blew up the internet. All those best ideas didn't go away, they just kind of went into open source, and that's happened with VR too. To the point where then you have Palmer Luckey, the creator of Oculus, on the cover of Time magazine looking kind of silly, but it was, you know, virtual reality is here. So, you know, there's still a question like, is it real this time? You know, we could have things like this. Anyone see this? This is an April Fool's joke about a year ago of the Poculus Rift, and, you know, to help our dogs at home, and they could, like, you know, feel like they're outside. They didn't address how they're going to go to the bathroom, but I don't think so. I think this is here to stay, and investment firms are seeing this too. This is one, this firm, Digit Capital, was predicting that it'd be a $150 billion market by 2020. I think that's actually, I think it's going to be bigger than that, just because the gaming industry, which is moving into this in a big way right now, makes $100 billion a year, okay? That's about $60 billion a year more than movies, television, and music combined. All right, so gaming is a real entertainment industry. And so we'll have, you know, gaming, but then all these other fields as well moving in. So I got into this the way a lot of people did, through Nani de la Peña, who Jamie Pallett from Emblematic will be talking about a little bit. Engadget called her the godmother of virtual reality. I totally believe it. This is a picture of one of the, what turned out to be one of the early prototypes of the Oculus Rift. We were viewing Hunger in Los Angeles. We brought her out to Syracuse, and it was sort of interesting to hear that, you know, to see how far things have come. And we had to set up this entire motion capture studio essentially in my office. I still have the scars up in the ceiling tiles from it. And now you can just, you know, for $800 buy something like that and connect it to your PC. From that, I then decided, well, I really want to do something serious with this. So talking with people at Gannett, we decided back in 2014 to do something for Oculus, even though it wasn't a consumer product. So it was called Harvest of Change. And basically, the story that they focused on for the Des Moines Register was really about changes in farming and food supply, and just potential farm crisis with changes in demographics, and how that kind of affects the entire world. And we decided, well, how are we gonna bring all these pieces together? What's the equivalent of, you know, the news package for VR? And we decided, well, let's make it the farm itself. And so we actually had a former game developer come in, and he looked at Google Maps, you know, and Street View and everything, and then we had photographers go there, take pictures of everything, and he recreated everything. Like here, he took 3 days working on a tractor. It was a very ambitious project. And then we also decided at the last minute, well, let's throw some 360 videos in there. And we hired a company that specialized in that. This is a guy named Adrian, who at this time, he was using a kind of a refactored Google Street View camera, sort of interesting. Now you can just pull GoPros together. And we shot, we did some pretty crazy shots. This one was actually done from a helicopter, so you actually started out, don't need to have the audio. Well, seeing the entire scene from the air, and then you essentially land, and then you're you're going through a CGI game-like version of that farm. What's interesting about this farm experience here is that I spent about 3 weeks checking this out, working with the game developer, and then comparing it to photos.
As Justin calls the cows for their dawn feeding.
Sorry.
And the family patriarch talks about how tough
this is
workers to stay
feeding cows.
Go
to the next one. When I finally went there, I felt like I had deja vu. So I knew a place because I had visited it virtually and felt like I had been there. I knew every little nook and corner, but I had never actually been there. That's when I really knew, it was like, this is extremely powerful. And there was a lot of attention to detail. So here's some images you may have seen before, but Ray Soto basically took the photo, and then you can see on the right, you have the CGI representation. It was incredibly true to form, These are grain silos. So you flip through these, you can't, it takes a few seconds to see which one is real, which one is virtual. So, where is this going to be 5 years from now? Right? You may not be able to tell the difference, which create, there's opportunities there. There's also some potential scary things, right? How will we know it's real? So where I've kind of moved on from there is I'm now teaching the next wave of VR producers in my role as a professor. I have a virtual reality storytelling class. If you go to vrstorytelling.org, all of our materials are up there, so you can teach yourselves. And it's all Creative Commons licensed, and we're sharing. I think that RB and I will be sharing some things since we're both kind of teaching. And we teach everything that we know right now. We're teaching them, and these students go really far. Very quickly. They see that this is a future they want to be a part of, and they want to kind of build it. It's very exciting. The fun thing for me, I'm excited to see that there's 50 students who will have graduated with VR experience in May, which is just amazing to me when I didn't even know that people would take the class, right, 18 months ago. We're now 3D printing our own 360 rigs. I felt like I was running a little Fort Knox of GoPros here. But thanks to Dean Branham, who spoke yesterday. We put about you put about $50,000 into these, 60. But it's worth it because now we're seeing there's people all over, students all over Syracuse and in the region, creating 360 videos. We have here's what our rigs look like. What's great here is that you don't. So promise me, if you make a 360 rig, do not go and spend $500 for a little case, because you can 3D print it. And all of the STL files you could take to a 3D printer and print that and save yourself a lot of money and also give yourself flexibility. So they're out there shooting all the time, everything from football games to, here's kind of one example of one of the videos one of my grad students did. This is Andrew Polino. This is gonna play. Oh, sorry about that.
To make like $25 a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works out, I make $50 or better, but that's just the way it goes.
So this is called Breaking Barriers.
Just to make $1
and,
sometimes.
He spent an entire day with the dude who was asking for money
like
on
I
the
guess
street corner.
I really try to work every day. That's one of my
to help people
favorite
understand
things.
that these are not unemployed people, they're underemployed people. And you feel like you're there, like I feel like I've basically been homeless asking for money. And we also have advertising students doing interesting things. This was a student named Josh Dager who had the idea of using VR experience to promote a band and their new LP. And he recreated all of the members of the band in something called Infuse, uploaded them, animated them using Mixamo, and then even animated the lips of the avatars as they were talking and singing and stuff based on real audio. So the storytelling aspects here go far beyond just journalistic. This can move into also branded content, which of course the New York Times is also doing. I think it's great that they're using VR for advertising as well. So where does this go in the future? So some of you may have tried this, the HoloLens. We actually have one now with Newhouse, and I know there's some other schools that are getting this, and it's pretty amazing. If you haven't tried it afterwards, come down. I actually made a special AR installation right here of ISOJ. It's actually floating above me. You put this headset on, and you then see 3D stuff in your world. So it's kind of like the inverse of virtual reality. So I'll just kind of quickly demonstrate it for those who are interested. I mean, when I put this on, what I see is there's a shark hanging over all of you. There's the words ISOJ here with a floating planet, and there we go. Now I see it. And it's completely hands-free. So you select things like this, and then you move them around, and it's really, really immersive. So immersive media goes beyond just checking out and going somewhere else. You can also take other 3D stuff and put them into your environment. So I think what this says is that we all may be living in a world like this very soon. What Kara Swisher was saying earlier about how this stuff is not going away. And it's going to be ubiquitous. You're going to see people doing things like this with their personal dashboards. So it's an exciting time, I think, to be experimenting with this. And I'm going to pass it on to the next speaker now.